Thanks to Shane. Got it. Thanks
Got
to
it.
Shane. And thanks to our participants, and thanks to the conference organizers. This is such an incredible conference. And we were just talking before folks started joining that these presentations, I've got this PowerPoint, but the keynote presentation before was just really remarkable. So I'm just so grateful to be here, very lucky to be here. So my name is Ingrid Ingerson, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education and Community Partnerships at Antioch University, Seattle. And I'm going to kick it over to my colleagues, Leela and Ken, to introduce themselves.
Yeah, hi, I'm Leela Hilton, and I'm the Executive Director of the Clemente course in the Humanities.
And I'm Ken Piankos, and I'm Manager for Continuing Education with Antioch University Online and Antioch Los Angeles. I'm also the power user and trainer of our customer relations management software called Elevate, an Ellucian product. So I enjoy that role as tech guru with continuing education.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and advance. Come on. Any second now, everybody. Oops, sorry. We're going to educate. Hold on a second, please. Of course, this would happen. Great. Okay, so before we go into the agenda, I wanted to talk a little bit about the mission and vision of Antioch University. I don't have to read them, but the reason why we included this slide is as we start talking about community partnerships and ways in which we can engage the community, I think it's always helpful for us to remember our mission and vision. Most of us have a mission and vision, which does include some kind of generosity, some kind of social justice. Specifically, Antioch University was founded on the foundation of social justice. And so I think as we all think about either diversity initiatives that have come up recently, equity initiatives, or even our mission, that it's really helpful to kind of remember and use that as the North Star as we're kind of thinking about expanding partnerships and community engagement. Okay, one time, it'll do it. Good. So today we're going to review quickly the Clemente program and how it came to Antioch University in a couple of different ways. We're going to show an incredible talk about trauma-informed education and a trauma-informed approach. We're going to have a small group discussion about ways we can bring this into our institutions. And then we're going to run through a couple of case studies and leave some time for questions at the end. Ken has been, as our tech guru, Ken has been kind enough to moderate our chat, but it seems like we might be a small enough group. But if you have any questions, we'd love to hear them in the chat. One time, anytime you're ready.
Great.
Okay.
I'm
trying to advance the slide. There we go. And there we go. We've got sticky keys.
Here we go.
Leela, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you. I just want to say, just in light of the Antioch mission and the theme of this about partnerships, that I'm an alum of Antioch. And so there's a multiple richness for me in doing this presentation as an alum and a partner in this project. So I'll just briefly talk about Clemente now, because you'll get more information through other parts of the program. But Earl Shores, who's the founder, 25, 30 years ago, was doing a lot of research about intergenerational poverty. And he was having a conversation with a woman in prison in New York about how to break the cycle of intergenerational poverty. And her response was that people who were living in the margins needed a moral alternative to the street. And so he kind of, further in the discussion, they sort of teased that out. And what she was saying was the humanities. And he went back in his history and thought about the significance of his freshman seminar in the humanities at University of Chicago, and replicated that seminar as the first Clemente course in the humanities that was held for free in the Lower East Side of Manhattan 25 years ago. And because the nature of our population is people living in poverty, and what he described as the surround of force, which is unemployment, medical issues, domestic violence, mental illness, predatory landlords, all these other surrounds of force, the big question or the big challenge for us was access. And we're going to talk a lot about what that means today, but sort of on a higher level, that meant making it free, offering childcare, transportation, books for free. But it also meant that in the pedagogy, we had to address the needs of our students on a daily basis. And so ideas about sustained engagement, students could always come back into the classroom, having it be interdisciplinary. We teach 5 different disciplines, not dumbing it down. It was a college course then, it's still a college course. We offer credit. And also it has a college reentry component for students who have been perhaps on academic probation, they could get back into Clemente. And the sort of the brass ring for us, though, going forward is really civic engagement, because his response to this issue of intergenerational poverty was that people were excluded from the life of their communities, and that's what kept them from, living the lives that they wanted to live. So that idea of civic engagement is central to Clemente. The college credit is there for students who want it. The one thing I want to say leading into Ingrid's introduction of the Veterans Initiative is 8 years ago, we started a special program specifically for veterans in response to a woman who had lost her son. He had taken his own life. He was in Iraq, and she felt very strongly if he had the kinds of options that we offer in Clemente, he would not have taken his own life. So we worked with veterans to create the Seattle Veterans Initiative, and Antioch was one of our very first partners. So take it away, Ingrid.
So we joined forces in 2016, but as we're sort of looking at this timeline, and a quote from one of our students, I kind of wanted to set this up by first talking about some of the challenges, because I think that as administrators and specifically working in continuing education and in adult education, if we're thinking about expanding some of our outreach and being citizens of the communities in which we live, sometimes within our institutions, that outreach can be impeded by several things. So when Clemente approached us in 2016, it was a bit tricky. The institution was going through a little bit of a restructuring. We have 5 campuses nationwide, and we had run those relatively independently for decades. And that was a time in which we were bringing these campuses together under one university. So there was a lot of not instability, but there was structural changes, formidable structural changes at the time that this program was come to us. At the Seattle campus, we hadn't, while we were very focused on our students and running programs entrenched in social justice with a heavy emphasis on independent study, we as an institution didn't have many, at that time, formalized programs that were doing this kind of outreach. So our walls, our boundaries were pretty impermeable at that time. We had a small program for shelter insecure women, but it was faculty led, and there wasn't anything at that time led by the institution. So there was a little bit of ground shaking. Who's going to pay for it? How long is it going to last? What are these students going to look like in the building, that we had to manage as we went forward. But what we came back to, of course, again, was the mission. And I don't know why my slides aren't advancing. They did in rehearsal, but it'll come in a moment, I'm assuming. So it's the city of Seattle. So in addition to serving our mission, I think it's important to think about where we can find resources to support these programs, but just our obligation to the city in and of itself. We are in the community, and this is an old picture. You can actually see the Antioch campus in this picture. Our new campus is not far away, but I think it's important to remember that what galvanized us is this idea that not only did a program like this live the mission, but it also invited us into the community a bit more. And now I'm going to throw it over to Ken, who's going to talk about a Clemente course that started long ago.
And that's the Bridge program at Antioch, Los Angeles. And it was founded on the principles of Clemente pedagogy and structure. It provides education for students who may not otherwise have access to education. So each week, Bridge students attend class to begin college, to earn up to 15 transferable units of university credit, and to study philosophy, literature, art, history, writing, and urban studies, all free of charge. The Bridge program is an important part of AULA's commitment to economic justice, providing a jumpstart to higher education for students. Since 1999, nearly 700 students have gathered to continue their education, to engage in creative and critical discussions, and ultimately to broaden horizons of possibility for themselves, their families, and certainly their community.
Okay. So Leela, I don't know if you want to go ahead and introduce what we're about to watch.
Yes, please. Due to the nature of our students, we assume that many of them have dealt with trauma. Often we don't know the source or the kind of trauma that they have been dealing with or are still dealing with in our classrooms. And we know, particularly with the veterans we're serving, who are all struggling to come back to their communities after their service, that there are deep trauma issues in their lives too. So we pulled together our faculty from Antioch and Clemente about 2 years ago to design a 2-day training on the trauma-informed classroom. And this is an excerpt from that training. We will post this full video, which is about an hour, and there's a wonderful Q&A after the part that we're going to show you that I urge everybody to watch if you're interested in this work. So these are our faculty talking about the trauma-informed classroom.
As educators, we often work with students who've experienced trauma, but we feel ill-equipped to grapple with it. Today, we'll explore the meaning of trauma and its manifestations, and using the Providence Clemente Veterans Initiative as an example, offer ways for educators to use trauma-informed pedagogy to help their students learn. Clemente reimagines the humanities seminar to engage adults who may not have access to higher education. We serve veterans, single parents, people transitioning from incarceration, and survivors of domestic violence, addiction, and homelessness. It's free, including tuition, books, and childcare. Contemporary students are more likely to show up with life experiences that challenge their readiness to learn. The classroom must evolve to meet students where they are and proactively engage them. Trauma-informed pedagogy promotes healing, finding new purpose, and development of autonomy. The trauma-informed approach means we assume adversity in the student's life that affects them in the present. Coping reactions used to survive in the past are still at play, and therefore mindfulness of course content is essential. Avoid or mindfully approach material that could re-traumatize the student. Life is disrupted by trauma. The body is permanently conditioned to danger, always on alert. The mind is fragmented into before and after the rupture of the traumatic event, which may reopen at any time. The self is turned inside out. The first stage of recovery is safety in body, in relationships, and in the environment. The second is telling the story of the trauma. As the trauma is reconstructed, the personal work of mourning will occur and the trauma can be transformed. The third stage moves from isolation and fragmentation to connection with community. Trauma shows up at the body-mind connection. Stress hormones flood, blood pressure and heart rate increase, changes in brain function persist. The internal world is altered through intrusions like flashbacks and nightmares. The body-mind constricts into a smaller world. These coping mechanisms are deployed in every new situation, including the classroom. The PCVI provides free humanities classes to all Rhode Island veterans, regardless of discharge status, deployment, age, rank, or education. It's premised on the idea that engagement with the humanities enables participants to see their experiences from multiple perspectives, and find community, healing, and purpose after returning home. Vets attend because they seek greater self-understanding, struggle with a sense of purpose, grapple with trauma, survivor's guilt, and moral injury, sense that intellectual discussions with other vets in a safe setting will help them find peace and healing. We've had some success using trauma-informed pedagogy with our students, and we'd like to share what we've learned with you. The first aim of trauma-informed pedagogy is recognition of trauma as a kind of knowledge. Anticipate common traumas for your population, identify content that speaks to those traumas, design assignments that encourage synthesis of personal knowledge in course content, and learn how to respond appropriately to trauma-related behaviors. The PCBI offers a twice-weekly seminar that recognizes the experience of war and moral injury as a form of knowledge, reframes isolated experiences within larger humanistic narratives, and fosters agency through connective, reflective assignments. The second aim of trauma-informed pedagogy is active restitution in the public sphere, paralleling recovery milestones. Educating in a group involves collaborative truth-telling. Harnessing narrative establishes trust in being heard. Offering frames puts personal experience into larger contexts, and fostering agency encourages an active stance toward one's trauma. One example of framing uses Plato's allegory of the cave to recognize the experience of war as a form of knowledge not easily shared. Faculty use accessible tools like crash course philosophy, concept maps, and dramatization to clarify the allegory. Small groups connect the experience of returning to the cave with the challenges of returning to civilian life. A second example filters ethical dilemmas in Antigone through normative ethical theories. Actors conduct live scene work from Antigone with students, comedic videos from the Good Place TV show, and the BBC History of Ideas complement texts on ethical theory. Using concept maps, small groups identify the moral reasoning of Antigone characters, which individuals reflect on through writing. Here's an example of a trauma-informed activity we've used in PCBI. Vets are asked to identify an emotionally intense time from their past when they could have used some advice. They then write a letter to that version of themselves. They give advice, reflect upon their experiences, and teach one significant lesson from the semester's materials to that past self. This assignment acknowledges trauma that veterans have experienced and provides them a way to explore it. Integrating emotional and academic exploration allows them to frame the lessons in a personal and meaningful way. Those who insist that they are allergic to writing are often the first ones to submit drafts. Guidelines are important here. Make it clear to students that they're in charge of what they explore and share. Discomfort is okay. Damage and harm are not. Encourage frequent reflection. What meaning are you making of your experience? What are you learning, and what will you do with that information? Using these and other trauma-informed pedagogical approaches and activities, we've had significant measurable success with PCBI students. We work in higher education, and we believe much of what we do can be adapted for broader use in your own classrooms and institutions.
Okay.
Sorry about that, folks.
That's okay.
I think you could probably sum it up, Leila. I do want to say I do enjoy the PechaKucha method. And we, just to preface why we wanted to show this, this film is because, you know, as administrators, it's always helpful to hear from the experts, but I strongly encourage watching that entire video, as it is really incredible and gives incredible resources.
As educators,
okay. We're going to get there, everybody. We're going to get there. Okay, Leila, take it away.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, and so just to put this in a broader context, Clemente has 35 courses in the US, and we, and this video is clearly for our faculty, for people who are teaching in the classrooms. But some of the important takeaways up here are that idea of open doors, and that's a physical thing as well as a metaphorical piece, is allowing students to come in to the classroom and leave if they need to in the moment or for days at a time, but that there's no penalty for a student taking the time and space they need for themselves to come back into the classroom at another time. And also in classrooms themselves, it's really important for students to understand how physically to leave a classroom. And you'll hear this from veterans quite a bit. When they come in, they're always looking for the exit. So you want a space that allows people to move around, find comfortable spaces, leave if they need to. Avoid classrooms with big windows where people are walking by and looking in all the time. Text selection is extremely important, and Mark talked about that a little bit. And multiple options for demonstration of learning is really critical. Some students write, some people draw, some people create a performance piece. The students need to be able to speak in their own voice and respond to these texts in ways that are meaningful to them. And one piece that is really critical in all our programs is the students themselves define the classroom norms. So the very first class, the students describe for themselves and the entire classroom what kinds of behaviors and expectations to expect, you know, showing up sober, being prepared, respecting silence, whatever those pieces are. But if the students create that from the beginning, then they become accountable and hold each other accountable as well. And the partnerships that surround these programs are critical. You cannot do this kind of pedagogy and teaching in isolation. The faculty cannot do it in isolation. But what we do find, and what you will hear from Mark if you watch the whole piece, and why we call this Teach What You Love, is that there is a deep commitment of love of learning, love of one's discipline, and love of these students and their experience that makes this work possible. You cannot step back from it and orchestrate a trauma-informed space. You have to engage, and the students really need to understand who you are, and you need to be very clear that you see them where they are, that you see them as individuals, and honor their experience. And I don't know that we have a lot of faculty in here, but I think as administrators, it's important to understand what kind of space you need physically for the students and institutionally for them and the faculty.
Okay, so we're at our discussion time, and we were going to do breakouts, but it's tiny. So what I think I'll do is I'll just stop sharing so I can see everybody. Oh, there's Terry.
Hi,
Hello,
Terry.
David. Oh, this is so nice. I see everybody. I always say that this is a lot like, and I'm going to date myself right now. So forgive me. And I also grew up on the East Coast. So maybe some of you, there was a show called Romper Room. And at the end, she had the magic mirror, and she would always say, I see Peg, and I see David, and I see Terry, and I see Ken. So that's how I always feel when I stop sharing my screen. And welcome to Kate and Christina. So we have some time, and we wanted to have a deep generative conversation about trauma-informed education, but also and how it might show up in your institutions, and looking into partnerships, which we're going to get into after this discussion. But really a time to think about, and Ken, I don't know if you want to throw those questions into the chat. So I stopped sharing my screen, so we'll have to rely on chat, but I wanted to see everybody's faces. So to think a little bit about, I mean, this could be a bragging time where we get to share with each other the projects we're working on and some of the community that we've reached out to already, and things that are working, but also thinking about that, you know, image of Seattle, thinking about the images in your community, and thinking about the communities that you would like to serve, or how you might serve them better. And then certainly identifying what those challenges are, and then thinking about allies. So kind of using this a bit as a workshop time. And it's fun because we've got some folks from Antioch in the room as well. But just kind of opening it up. And if anybody's interested in talking about either, thank you, Stephanie, talking about some of these questions and thoughts.
Well, I had a couple of questions about this phenomenal program. Thank you for sharing information about this truly important program. My first question, can I ask questions now about the program, or because
Sure.
it helps me to brainstorm what the workshop is supposed
Sure,
to be right
sure.
now. When students are participating in the program, are they also encouraged to simultaneously seek psychotherapy?
No, I wouldn't say overtly. I mean, we certainly have a lot of partners we work with that we would refer students who seem to have those needs, but we try to, yeah, I mean, I think it's really a function of the partnerships and the resources in the community. So I think if someone was in deep crisis, I think we would feel comfortable trying to help them out. I don't think generally we would go there. We try to really maintain the classroom as an academic space. So it's nuanced. I mean, it's a really good question, but there's always that tension and challenge in a Clemente classroom of balancing the academic with the therapeutic nature of the work, because we are not therapists.
No, right, exactly.
And
but
I
was
know you
just
understand
thinking
that. Yeah.
simultaneous,
Yeah.
support.
Yeah.
How are faculty trained? So for example, if a student were to have a trigger or a traumatic response during class with the class content, how do faculty handle that? Are faculty trained with some clinical psychology or some, how are they?
Yeah, good question. And that video is a beginning to address that, because in all honesty, we've sort of backed into this work based on the populations that we've been serving for 25 years. And we've learned really in the classroom, but with that mindfulness that our model includes these community partners, so that we're not ever expecting to manage these situations on our own.
Exactly.
That exercise at the beginning of the class addresses that too, where the students sort of, a lot of them understand their own triggers and what they need. And so they will put that out in the space and say, I need to be allowed to I need to be able to cry or leave the room or not come back or call my mom. So they create that too, but it's something that we're constantly addressing. But no, we have not had, people working directly with us to respond in those situations.
And I will add something to the partnership. I think one of the advantages and one of the things we identified early on working with this population, and I think it's really, and we'll be talking about this a little in a bit, but Antioch Seattle specifically has a counseling clinic.
Right.
And so I think for us, we as educators and having strong psychology programs, I think we realized that we, as much as we were living the mission and inviting this partnership in, I think we knew that it would be really important to have that kind of support for the students. So we're really lucky in that. But I think, as we'll talk about later, even if that's not, the circumstance that people find themselves in, the amenability of community partners to support this kind of program, because the work is so important, has been, as I'll talk about later, there's always a lot of support and cooperation. And the other thing I'll mention that Leela may mention later as well is we're very lucky also at the Seattle campus, and that the academic director that holds this program is also a therapist
Right.
and an educator and has worked in this. So I think it also has to do with the kind of faculty that we have organizing these programs.
Yeah.
It occurs to me that the faculty who are working with this population who can potentially be so vulnerable just need to be really sensitive and so mindful in everything they say, the textbooks, like you said, the content of the class material. It's like you have to be really sensitive, I would imagine. Yeah.
I'd like to add a note about partnerships in probably the Clemente, and I know certainly from my experience with the Bridge program over the years in Los Angeles. Ingrid spoke to the strong clinical psychology graduate programs on our campuses, and one of the backbones I observed throughout years of working with Bridge are the volunteers. And oftentimes those are volunteer students in internship from the psychology programs. Mm. They're not there to teach the courses, faculty do, but the volunteers are there as tutors at every weekly class and are integrated in the dynamic and family of that class setting. So I want to say, without a formal structure for that clinical psychology students as interns are valuable and integral volunteers in that tutor's role in the classrooms that I've worked with.
Right.
And it probably should be recognized as standard and one of those intangible or unspoken undercurrents and values.
Yeah. I did want to say too, though, that in Clemente courses, especially in the veterans course, many of them have had social workers in the classroom, or in the veterans courses, we brought graduates back to be peer tutors, peer teachers, so that they can help hold that space. So even though our faculty themselves may not be trained in the classroom, we've often had people who can help model those responses, which helps the faculty become more comfortable, because it can be intimidating for the faculty to step into that role.
So Christina has her hand up. I wanted to make sure we got to Christina.
Thanks, Ingrid. I just wanted to say that, Stephanie, we had this very serious conversation when we were about 15, 20 years ago, because we work with correctional populations, and they are a vulnerable population, and they have a lot of traumatic experiences behind them. I think I talked about this in my talk yesterday, is that they come from very denuded and traumatic environments as children. And so they're carrying that through in their entire lives. And when we have our instructors, which in my province, I'm from Canada, every single one of those instructors by law comes from a university or college. So they're not specially trained, which is something I'm trying to work on here. But one of the things that we did 15, 20 years ago, we actually sat down and said, because, as part of a rehabilitation, you get education, you get counseling, and you get spirituality access for all inmates. And one of the things that we talked about is which one should come first. And one of the things that came up is, for our addictions programs and our anger management programs, education often worked better first, followed up by counseling and therapeutics. And now, this is a long time ago, and this is probably something I should look into again now. But the one that was needed to go into therapy right away was our family violence folks, because those are usually generational behaviors. And so the generational behaviors, it really wasn't effective for them to be going into their family violence courses until they had completed some therapy. And that was a piece, I think, and some supports maybe is even better than therapy. It's just the support to talk about those emotional aspects, because and we did have a blow up, just FYI, we did have a blow up, and I had an instructor who wasn't prepared and they quit. And this person wasn't somebody who was just a college professor. He had dealt with an addiction. He had gone to prison. He had come out, and he had a degree in business or something like that. He just got into a real tough spot, right? He got himself into a real tough spot. And he came out and he was teaching because he wanted to give back, but he wasn't prepared. We put him into a classroom that was a female classroom, and he was teaching anger management. And one of the ladies was triggered, and he was absolutely petrified and would go back into the classroom. So absolutely 100%, there is a gap. That's part of what I'm trying to work on right now to research is instructor preparedness, working with vulnerable populations, because every instructor, and I said this yesterday, there that I interviewed for my research, I was just amazed by their commitment, by how much effort, their heartfelt wanting to help every student in their class.
Mhm.
And they would do anything to see them successful once they're released. So I don't think it's intention, but I do wonder if there's other skill sets that we could be offering our professors, our college instructors, as they go into the work with vulnerable populations.
Absolutely. And I would be remiss coming from the humanities to not emphasize how important text can be in these spaces. A lot of the classical plays that we teach from Greece were written by generals as cathartic pieces for soldiers who've been in wars for years and years and years. So that, I mean, that was very much built into those pieces. And if you offer those pieces of literature for students, it's a wonderful way of stepping into those issues in a way that protects them, but also gives them that sense of recognition of an experience that's happened forever. Anyway, the text selection is really important in this space, for sure. And one piece about Clemente that really responds to what you just said is that because credit is not the brass ring for us, our commitment is to those students being successful in the ways that they need to be. And the only people who can do that are the kind of faculty that you talk about, that you speak about, are willing to take the time and get the training and support and go the extra mile outside of the classroom to support these students. They're not in a classroom where they have a certain content that needs to be mastered and assessed and credit granted or not. That's not what we're doing at all. Although the credit is there for someone who completes the work at a college level. So it's a different learning environment in higher education than most of us have experienced.
And I really appreciate that feedback, because I know that Clemente we're working on that. And as we expand our partnerships all over, and Ken will go into that in a bit, this is one of the things. So this is why I love this conference. I can't wait to connect with you, Christina. This is so exciting. So I'm going to go ahead and reshare my screen and pick back up. Let's see if I can do this successfully. But we'll see. Okay, we're not. Here we go. Something's going to happen. Great. I'm going to pick up here and say thank you for that discussion. It was really helpful. So we are here. Leila, if you just want to keep going.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to, we have posted, and I'm not sure where they are, they're not in the chat, but we posted materials for all of you on collective impact, universal design, and surrounded force. The collective impact and universal design may be theoretical approaches for collective impact is about forming partnerships, and universal design, it's more about what happens in the classroom. The surrounded force is the article that Earl Shores, the Clemente founder, wrote about the first Clemente course and his theory and practice behind that. And it's a really informative kind of article, not just for Clemente, but just to think about how we enter the classroom and education with these populations in a different way. So we just wanted to put those up for you to remind you that they are there as resources for you.
Leila?
Yes, sir. Hi, Terry.
Yeah, I'll just let everyone know that those handouts are in the Whova.
Oh, in the Whova.
App
Okay,
for
great,
this
great.
presentation.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, I uploaded them, and I will also include the video and the PechaKucha in the chat.
And one thing I'd just like to say about partnerships, and I get a sense that all of you know this, but when you look at partnerships in your community to help you with these, with this outreach to new populations, there has to sort of be this spirit of it's just the right thing to do. I mean, you have to kind of start out in that place, because otherwise you're going to run into lots of institutional barriers, and you have to find the allies in the community. And one of my favorites is a story about a Toyota dealership in Arizona who became one of our great supporters in a women's veterans program. But look in those unlikely places. And also that that you need to find organizations with common missions so that your partnership is not transactional, that you're all serving, you're all heading in the same way. I think of it as a watershed, we all live downstream. You're all moving in that direction and avoiding that, well, I'm going to, provide you with a classroom and you're going to provide me with enough students to, qualify for a grant, that kind of thing. That's never, ever going to work. And I'm sure all of you know that, but I just wanted to remind you that these have to be really informed by that sense of it's the right thing to do. I mean, and you have to figure out allies who believe you and believe that themselves.
Yes, and that's where we found ourselves when we started this partnership with Clemente. And I just wanted to go through a little bit of the academic piece of how we took this model that we were discussing and Christina's great thoughts and fit it into I actually originally titled this slide, Making It Work for Our Accreditors, because I think it's one thing to host, but when we decided that, for lots of different reasons, we wanted to fully embrace the Clemente program and make it a part of our curriculum, there were certain things that we needed to think about as we developed that. And we really wanted to center the integrity of what Clemente has built over these 25 years, but also trauma-informed education. So as Leila was talking a bit before about these agreements that the students need and having the students participate in being able to leave and come back, I'll never forget there was a moment in which we were talking about funding as this original partnership was going on, and Leila said, look, sometimes students leave and they come back 3 months later. Sometimes they come back 3 weeks later. And before a lot of these new evolutions in trauma-informed education, even before we were calling it that, there was a place in which these community partners, specifically Clemente in this example, were really bringing to us a lot of on-the-ground knowledge. And I think it's really important as we think about community outreach and reaching out to other organizations that we're absolutely, putting ourselves in listening mode and sticking to the integrity and learning from these organizations and just adopting the wisdom that they have because of their on-the-ground experience. And I know, Christina, you could probably speak to that as well. So here's how we did it. And I do want to say that every institution is different. This specific granting academic credit to Clemente veterans in this case was very specific to the undergrad program that we have at Seattle, but we are actually looking to adapt it to other Clemente chapters and other organizations. But the model in and of itself is we are very lucky in that the undergraduate program at Seattle and many programs and all programs at Antioch are competency-based. So we have a really nice broad field in which we can couch this. And at the Seattle program, we worked with the academic director to create a curriculum that was really accessible. So with the idea that students would be able to gravitate and succeed in the places where they were finding the most connection, and that we could grant credit in these smaller bits. So instead of a 5-credit chunk in which they would have to complete all the assignments and participate at a certain level and maintain a certain structure that might, regardless of where they're coming from, be untenable given whatever particular traumatic situation they were dealing with, that we would try to build these small chunks. And then you'll notice that the spring quarter, the TBD means that it gives our academic director and our faculty a chance to pivot based on the cohort that started in fall, which gives us a lot of flexibility, still allows us to grant credit, still allows the integrity of the program, but makes it so that depending on how the students are showing up in the classroom, we are allowed to meet them where they are.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Well, all I'd add is that there are 35 Clemente courses, and I think there are probably 8 different credit granting institutions. So it works in different ways in different institutions, which is as it should be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's just an example. So some of the important other support systems that we are able to apply, which, you know, I encourage us to all kind of think about as we're thinking about community outreach. Certainly, the most formidable challenge as we were thinking about embarking on this partnership was and we were anticipating that as people were thinking about this, the first question that comes to mind is, especially from administrators and higher level administrators, is who's going to pay for it. And so just to share that when we took the leap and did it because it was the right thing, we actually started with a partial grant, and then it was Antioch's responsibility to sort of come up with it. And so we engaged our grants officer at the university level. And I will say that finding funding and supporting program, which I thought it was really relevant to bring up specifically at this conference, is I have seen success in staff positions that you wouldn't normally think of. And sometimes that falls really wonderfully, dovetails into continuing education and adult education programs. So I think the success of this program has to do with the fact that Antioch Seattle had within it, when we started it, and now me with my position, thinking about continuing education and adult education and lifelong learning as a very external arm of the university, which allows us to give some bandwidth to support these programs. So I have helped with, you know, getting grant funding, making sure the reporting isn't on time, financial stuff. And I think it's really important to underscore how some of the concerns at an institution can be, well, who's going to do it? You know, and it can't be a program chair. Sometimes it can't be a staff member that's supporting an academic program, but sometimes looking for those champions, which we call them at the Seattle campus, those that are in roles that straddle one or two departments that can kind of hold this external partnership piece. And certainly I wanted to talk about, and I know Leela will underscore this as well, the idea of donations from local organizations. So for the support at the Seattle campus, we got free food. That's one of the Clemente standbys, is to make sure that people are fed and that they have a meal. So it kind of engenders community. And so we have pizza delivered when we were on campus, and now online we have a partnership that we're working with a local computer repair store, so that we can send out tablets and support our students technically. Certainly we support them with classrooms. And then, you know, once again, it's leveraging community connection. So right now we are working with a grant from the county, and I can't tell you the support that we've been able to, that goes both ways. So the county, because we're a university, the county allows us access to other veterans organizations, which allows us to build the student population. So I think going back to the car dealership, it's always it's incredible to find the organizations in the community that are willing to support something like this.
Yeah.
Okay, any second now? Okay, here we go. And back. And Ken.
Thank you.
Sure.
So expanding on the pedagogy, the principles, and the trauma education, I wanted to point out some of the perhaps less tangible concepts and outcomes associated with Clemente and Bridge. Both provide more than access to education. Many students have continued their education after Bridge. They complete associate's degrees, they attend university and even graduate school. Students affect change in their personal lives. In their careers and communities, many participate more fully in public life, going to museums, studying at libraries, attending poetry readings, concerts, plays. These are important, I think, components and outcomes of the programming that we've just described. Some become active in local politics, community organizations. So I'd like to personalize the narrative with a simple case study. An ethnography is qualitative evidence of trauma-informed education outcomes. And so I'm going to say, let's meet Willow. Willow is an 80-year young bridge student, and she found home, a sense of purpose and identity with Antioch University. A home where she could reflect, process life of trauma and triumphs. Willow became a prolific poet, consumed a passion for writing and sharing her rhetorical, timeless capture of the human condition. I invited Willow to read at the Antioch Podium in our pavilion at the Los Angeles Times Festival of Books in 2018. On a beautiful Sunday on the downtown USC campus, she captured it. The following week, Willow danced into my library office with a handcrafted book of her poetry works, complete with illustrations and photography, and I assured her that gift would be cataloged and shelved in my permanent library. I was the academic librarian at the time. I learned that she passed in her sleep less than a week after that. And the indelible evidence of her life and a story of purpose in the human condition is timeless and a treasure I wanted to share in story. To paraphrase another student's testimonial, we come to education needing, we leave with the power to give. And I think that sums up the passion and the spirit of our intentions for you today in discussing extended education and lifelong learning. And I want to close by pointing out that Antioch University Continuing Education offers not just professional development certificates and non-matriculated for-credit programming to the popular audience and nationwide, but free programming where we bridge and design and create a curriculum that's inclusive to folks who have limited access to education and folks who have a broad and worldwide experience with education. And examples of those are an upcoming program, and we will put the website link in our chat in just a second. Anti-Racism and Universal Design for Learning in Higher Education. This is a community conversation sponsored by the Interdisciplinary Masters of Arts program and specifically focuses on anti-racist views to support universal design for learning. So I have an upcoming free programming that's a great complement to the handouts Layla has prepared for you and our topic. Veterans Day on November 11th, Robert Morgan Fisher, who has for more than a decade led a veterans writing program called UCLA Commandos, will be offering a free 1-hour workshop open to the public. And I think, again, another place for interaction and intersection, and I know certainly inclusion. And then I want to point out that extended and continuing education consistently offer mindfulness, body, spirit, meditation programming. So this is a great way to close and to speak to how extended learning and continuing education in broad strokes will specifically provide education to those who don't have access, who support and programming that satisfies the mission and values we started talking about toward economic and social justice. And I'm delighted that we had this time together. It looks like, Ingrid, there'll be a few minutes for final conversation.
3 minutes left. I'm going to stop sharing so I can see everybody again. I really like that. That's my favorite. So yeah, I'm going to rush because I was screen sharing. I want to rush to get some of these links in the chat. I don't know if you have them handy, Ken, but we do have 1 or 2 minutes for questions if anybody would like to follow up.
Well, I do have a question. I'd be interested both in Seattle and Los Angeles, how you identified those partners that contribute to the program.
That's a really good question. We've been really well. There's a couple of ways in which we've done it. I think at least in Seattle, and I think Ken could probably speak to this a little bit. In Seattle, it was creating the role that had. It was creating the resources and the role, my role which is community partnerships. And so the idea that looking at continuing education as this external arm. So there would be professional development education, there would be, supporting our education program and our psychology programs, but there would also be somebody who was in the field and in the community, kind of going to Rotary and going to, I still go online and working in the community. So I think dedicating resources like that, but then certainly, it's talking with the faculty. And then we've been really lucky in Seattle, in which, because Leela was an alum, that's how Clemente came to us. But there are those that are faculty affiliated that have approached us as well.
In Los Angeles, the Bridge students present or create organically a social event in honor of their commencement or graduation from the program. And at that time, the students meet sponsors, partners, and supporters. In the day, it was 150 people in a room for dinner. And that was always exciting. Now, of course, that same sort of ceremony can happen virtually, but that was important. And for the students to shake the hand of that car dealership and meet the Rotarians who raised funds one-on-one and in person was satisfying for everyone on both sides.
Okay, well, we're at time. Thank you for being in our little coffee clatch. And thanks to Shane, and thanks for everybody who's coming. And again, you can find all of those links to those articles. I think they're on Whova. I loaded them in my speaker bio, so they are in the event. And I look forward to connecting with you more.
Great. Thank you, everybody. Nice to meet you.
Leela. Thanks to
Please
Shane.
find the link to Antioch University Continuing Education in chat before you go. Of course, now it's our core group.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys, for
Thank
coming.
you. Thanks for being here.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Great job, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you, Terry. Can we all stay here a minute? Oh, Ingrid went. Okay.
Oh, well, Layla, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's
It's
been
so nice